Am I too loud? Loud enough? Is that all right? People in the back of the room? I'll take no response as a good response. All right. All right, my name is Thomas Akin. I'm the director of the Southeast Cybercrime Institute, which is part of Kennesaw State University. It's a partnership between the university, the FBI, Georgia Bureau of Investigation, local police departments, National White Collar Crime Center, and the Georgia Attorney General's office. I do a lot of teaching, speaking, and research in the areas of cybercrime computer forensics, and we're going to talk about, webmail forensics. The slides are not in the book, but they are on the CD. And also at the end of this, you'll get my email address, and if you want me to email you a copy of the presentation, I'll be glad to do that. When I first started, the idea for this presentation, I thought that this would just be really exciting. Nobody's really done, dedicated a lot of research to this. And I had grand visions of writing multiple Perl scripts that would go through and just automatically strip out all the useful information from, the cache and other places on the systems. And as I got looking into it, I discovered that as far as the internet cache and things like that go, there are already a lot of tools that do that really well. And either you're going to have it there or you're not going to have it there. You may find some pieces in Slack space and things like that. And so we will talk about how to go into the internet cache with browsers and and pull up what people have seen and looked at and the email folders, all that. But the interesting parts of this became when people try to hide their origins using webmail systems, how they try to spoof it, because you can't just use an open relay. Since it's you're using HTTP to communicate with a webmail server. You can't use some of the standard methods. And the other is, even if the cache is gone, usually the internet history is still going to be there. And you can actually deconstruct the URLs to figure out what actions they were taking at certain times by aligning those with timelines. And so those became the two interesting areas of this that we'll talk about additionally as part of the presentation. Again, we'll briefly overview browser forensics for those who haven't dealt with that. We'll talk about the webmail services, the webmail headers, how people are trying to obscure their webmail headers so that even when they send it through Hotmail or Yahoo, the IP addresses are obscured, cache history, and then the URL deconstruction. Talk about some tools, and then talk about some other services and what you can and can't discover there. Browser forensics, if you haven't done it, places you're generally going to look. Internet favorites, of course, cookies, their history, typed URLs in the registry, temporary internet files, and auto-completion is also a fun one to look at that I find some people don't tend to look at. They don't copy over those files and look at that. Netscape, equivalent things, we have the bookmark, contacts, history, preferences, typed URLs, cookies, and of course the cache. And again, if you don't know favorites, you just pull them down from your favorites. They're all right there. They're also in a folder on the system. One of the things that when you're doing forensic analysis, obviously you don't want to just sit down on a suspect's machine and start opening up Internet Explorer and taking a look at their favorites and things like that. But a lot of times also, you're going to want to make a copy of the drive and analyze the copy, oftentimes in read-only mode. But even if you do that and you're using it to like Encase or things like that to analyze the copy of the system, and you open up the folder and you show the favorites, you can actually go and you can argue that in court and it looks good. But I found that a lot of times when people are presenting evidence in court, even if they have it 100% technically correct, it really helps the jury and the judge if you put it in a format they can recognize. Most people who've used Internet Explorer, they would recognize if you clicked on favorites and you had a list of all their favorites coming down right here and you had a picture of this in your evidence. But whereas if you just showed them Encase and a bunch of log entries showing the different internet favorites and timelines, they might not put as much faith in that just because they don't understand it. So a lot of times what you can do is what the National White Collar Crime Center calls a copy over procedure. But what they'll do is they'll go create a clean install with all the systems, and they'll just copy over the temporary internet files, copy over the user data, copy over everything else. And then what they can do is they can just run it on that system, print it out in a nice format so that when people are looking at it who aren't technology oriented, they're more comfortable with it. Cookies, fun stuff there. They're just going to be in the cookies folder. Nothing too exciting. Of course, the history. A lot of people I found are getting wiser about deleting their temporary internet files. Setting the browsers up to automatically, every time they shut down Explorer or something, to automatically clean out their TIFF files, temporary internet files, things like that. But even those people who are getting wiser about that, a lot of times have no idea that there, is a history file that records the URLs. That's one of the things we'll talk about URL deconstruction, because if they've deleted their cache or the temporary internet files, you can still find out a lot of useful information from the history. Typed URLs in the registry. These are any URLs they've obviously typed into the browser and hit enter. They've manually typed those in. Basically, if you just use regedit and search for typed URLs, they'll pop right up. Then temporary internet files. Wherever they're stored, Internet Explorer, Netscape store them in different areas, depending on what version of OS and you're running. These are all the cached images and HTML files from the system. Index.dat, of course, holds and basically that's an index for all those files. All right, and then auto-completion. When you copy over all of the user data files, okay, you also you get to copy over the auto-completion files, and this is nice because when you open up the browser, and let's say you go to Yahoo and you want to see who they've sent email to, you just hit the down arrow and boom, there go your auto-completion, and it's automatically brought out of the files for you. So that's always fun. Say, no, I never sent to Abigail at home. I never sent an email there, but if it's in their auto-completion, obviously they typed it in at some point. All right, when looking at this, web-based email clients are susceptible to the same problems that any client that uses web browsers is susceptible to, and that's storing a lot of information. Cookies, URLs, cache, all that stuff we just talked about. One of the keys when you're looking for temporary internet files and looking for cache is that the user has to have done something that caused that page to be cached. Okay? So what this means is if they read a message, if they go to Yahoo or Hotmail and they read a message, and they pull it down, that message is going to be pulled down from the server and it's going to be shown on their browser right there, and that message is going to be cached. So basically, any messages that they've opened up and read are going to be cached on the system, which is nice. Alternatively, if they hit compose, get that dialog box, and they type their message in, and then hit send, the only thing that is going to be cached is that compose page with a blank box. You're not going to get any of the other information because that's not sent to cache, that was sent directly to the other server. So a lot of times you won't see any of their sent emails on the local system, unless they have said, save as a draft. Because what happens when you hit save as a draft or put it in your draft folder? It puts it in the draft folder and shows you a copy of it. Or if you pull it up later, you've pulled it up and so you get to see the cache. Or if they've run spell check. So they bring up the compose box, they run spell check, it's actually going to it's going to load the information up to the server, download it back with the spell check information, and you're going to be able to see the emails that they sent out on that. Webmail headers, standard email header type stuff, and we're going to get into this in a little bit more detail, but just want to, quick copy of those. This is a standard Yahoo header, and it has the X originating IP, which is supposed to be the IP of the web client that was actually logged into the system. They put that in there for two reasons: make it easier to investigate, and also so they don't have to deal with 10,000 subpoenas from law enforcement across the nation. They can actually just look immediately and, right there and find out what the IP address of the system that logged into the server and sent the email was. All this other interesting stuff, timelines and things, email header type stuff, we're going to kind of skip over that for now. Now we're going to get to, we're going to skip back a little bit and talk a little bit about how people, when they're using WebMail clients, how they go about trying to obscure their IP address. Because if you just log in from a system to Yahoo or Hotmail, it's going to include your IP address in that email, either as an X originating IP or in the received from headers, and it's going to basically say that, yeah, you're the one that sent this email. And standard techniques, if you're not using WebMail, open relay and false received headers. Open relay, spoofers use email open relay, they'll bounce their message through it, to try to, obscure tracking it. Most of the time when they do that, it still contains their IP address. And so by itself, it's not super useful, but they'll combine it with other techniques to try to hide themselves. Of course, when you're looking for that open relay, you look in the headers, when they do that, because it'll be the bottom received from if they haven't faked it. And then you have to look at the log files on the Open Relay system itself if you're checking the validity of the headers to make sure it actually did pass to that system, which can be a very big pain when somebody's using an Open Relay in Korea or China. So, like I said, you're not going to have to worry about that too much with web forensics because they're using a web-based client. They're not using SMTP port 25 through Open Relays. This is kind of here just for completeness. Again, another thing that with standard email you have to worry about are false received headers, received from headers. You know, if you look at the received headers in an email, they're going to give you history of every system that email passed through. And the only, header that you can trust 100% is the topmost received from header. And that, of course, is unless somebody's modified it locally on the system. That's been put there by your own system. But one thing I've seen is a lot of times you'll see people put in received from headers to try to, disguise where it came from. If it goes from me to you, naturally, I'll put a false header in that says actually it went from there to there to then to here to there. So I look like, instead of the originator, I just look like a relay, a hop in the middle. And so when they trace it back, they don't trace it back to me, they trace it back all the way over there. Most people screw that up. Most people screw up the received from headers. Because you actually, when you're doing that, you have to manually go in and do it. You have to put it in the exact right format. And you have to know what headers to put above it and what headers to put below it so that it actually attaches itself directly to the real received from headers. Because it does all the time. What I've seen is you'll see from field, received, to, date, subject, message ID, and then received. That doesn't, that's a clue right there. Received from headers generally should be compacted together. They just shouldn't be spread out, with all the other generic headers. So you'll see that a lot. You also see people, it takes a little bit of detail. You want to make sure you get the dates right. If you're going to go do that, you've got to know exactly how to get in the right place. But then you've also have to have the IP addresses correct, so it looks like it actually didn't originate from your system. You're just a hop, it originated from over here. Then you have to figure out the time zone of that system, and modify it so it came in a few seconds earlier before it came to you with the correct time zone. And so most people screw those kind of things up. And so when you're looking at received, headers and you're wondering if they're false, oftentimes looking at big time discrepancies, looking at, having a multiple headers in between received from headers, all that kind of stuff. That's what those automatic spam utilities, how many of y'all have used those? The automatic spam detection utilities that says this is probably spam type thing, that's what they do. That's what they look at, is because most people just don't have the discipline or the knowledge to actually correctly put in false received from headers. All right? If you know what you're doing, though, you can write an email that'll pass through those filters, and they'll think it's an absolutely 100% legitimate email. And at that point, the only way to check and trace where it really came from is you've got to look at the log files of every single system it passed through till you find a system that it didn't pass through, and then you'll know it's a previous system. Again, thinking about this, if you're doing received from headers, if you're putting in false received headers, you're actually you're using the SMTP protocol directly. You're directly connecting to an email server and manually putting this information in. Is this going to be a problem for us with WebMail stuff? No, not generally. Because even when you use a web-based client, it automatically puts the headers in for you. You have no direct way to manipulate the headers by using a web-based client. All you can manipulate, you can do the to, the from, the other things, as far as that goes. So I've not seen yet any techniques for manipulating the headers for these webmail clients because they take care of it automatically. Now, yes, I'm assuming if somebody wrote a very crappy client or the server was very crappy, there could probably be some insertion techniques in the current header fields that you might be able to do to add these to it, but I've not seen any of those yet, not come across any in my own research. What does happen is somebody tries to put a false received header in, they end up putting in the body of the message, and that gets real obvious, so if they don't use those standard two techniques, again, here's an example of a false received header, just to give you a quick overview of one that was sent out. Notice using the direct SMTP protocol, log into a system, and then mail from, to, and notice this received from header, added right there, right in the middle of that screen, and then the date, subject to, blah, 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 blah. Then we actually send an email. That's an actual SMTP, I telnetted to the SMTP port and typed all that in. And you end up with an email that looks like this. This actually was sent, it says it, if you look at these and read it, where does it say it came from originally? Korea.net by pigsite@kansas.edu. And then it says it was received from pigsite@kansas.edu by aramis.kansas.edu. That looks like a valid path. Those match up. Okay? But I put that header in completely false. So there's an example of doing that. Again, standard things. You look at the headers themselves, you see if there are any discrepancies, and then you trace it backwards, basically looking for log files. Now we get to the interesting web-based stuff. Okay, since they can't use those techniques, what techniques do they use? Well, I'm going to go over some of the ones that I've seen. First one's an anonymizer. Real easy. If it's a web-based client, you either pay or find one of those free anonymizers, configure your system to use the anonymizer. Some of them you don't even have to configure your browser. Some of them will give you a window inside a browser, like anonymizer.com, and you just type in the URL, you go to it, you go through it, and you send your email from there. If you're using an anonymizer, what IP address is going to appear in the email header? The anonymizer's IP address, not your IP address. So if you're investigating this and you come back and the originating IP address is anonymizer.com, you got a problem. And so where are you going to have to go to find additional information? Well, you hack into anonymizer.com. No, sorry. Don't tell them I said that. But you go get the subpoena. You open a John Doe lawsuit. You work with law enforcement, and you get a subpoena to get the log information from the anonymizer. And hopefully they have that information. Legitimate anonymizers that are pay services, generally they're going to have that log information. Sometimes there are anonymizers out there. I'm not going to tell you exactly where they are, but I'm sure y'all are ingenious enough to find them if you really want to. That actually say that they don't keep log files. They're free. Now the thing about that is, do you trust that person? Maybe they're reading everything that goes through the anonymizer, but some people aren't. Some people are privacy oriented. Some people just want to trick people into sending their email through them. So, and again, here's an example of one that this actually, my IP was 64.32.161.244. That was the IP address that actually sent this. But if you look at it, when it says it was received from 130.94.106.247. So, just an example of what it's going to look like. And if you go and you see that 130.94.106.247, if you do an NS lookup or a dig on that, it's going to come back to an anonymizer, and you got to go look at their log files. Open proxies. Anonymizers are similar to open proxies. Anonymizers are set up so that you have hundreds of thousands of people all using the same IP addresses to bounce their connections through. So it's impossible. So it's very, very difficult to go back and trace where it really came from, and also traffic analysis is going to be difficult because of the, all these people using it at the same time. Open proxies are similar to that. Usually, open proxies are when somebody screwed up. It's a proxy server that's been set up to allow anybody to use it as a proxy server. And companies set up proxy servers to help filter email, to help, increase their bandwidth, things like that. So, like after Senate, didn't they, 6 months ago, didn't the, U.S. Senate have an open proxy in their system that people were using and stuff? So a lot of times you'll find open proxies a lot of places. But all you do is, you just go in and set your system to use that open proxy. Again, when you get the email, this I set my browser to use open proxy 213.138.32.52. We get the received email address 213.138.32.52. It was really sent by 64.32.161.244. Again, you've basically, by using the open proxy, you bounce through that, and you've obscured the IP address of the original email. Where do you go again? What is the question? Log files of the open proxy. The thing about open proxy sometimes is, yeah.
What if the proxy server is out of the country?
And then that's why most people use ones out of the country, is because it's going to be very difficult to get those log files. And in all honesty, usually to get log files from international countries, you've got to either have very good connections over there, be able to really social engineer them out of the company or the person, or to get the feds involved, because they're the only ones with international jurisdiction. I'm sorry, the question was, what if the open proxy is in a foreign country? How do you get those log files? And that can actually be very difficult, which is why most people look for open proxies, in other countries. And again, it's going to be, when you're looking at this and trying to trace it back, it's going to be, is it worth it? If this is just, you're ugly, go away, I hate you, you might not want to put that effort. Then again, if it's a threat against the president, or let's say this is, related to terrorist activities, then you might actually, be worth going back to those efforts. Again, email headers, and you look at the log files. Now this is a new one. Most of you have probably heard that other one. This is a new one that I've come across. And it's related to when hackers would often go and install relays on systems, packet relays. They just, on a high port, they'd get it on the system and install a packet relay. They would just bounce the packets, whatever came in, bounce it to a different system. Well, SSH allows for you to tunnel connections through SSH. All right, very useful. I mean, use it all the time. But I found that SSH tunnels are not logged by default. Okay, which presents a little bit of a problem. Because if they're not logged, you don't know if the people SSH'd into your server are using tunnels through your server or not. So, if you open up, here we've got, an SSH connection to anonymizer.com, which is a legitimate service. So I've SSH'd in there. And to do this, I created a local tunnel from my system to anonymizers.com's proxy. All right? And so then I just set my system up to use my local host, or whatever port I set up to forward, as the proxy. So when you do that, what you've done is you've obscured your IP address, and it's going to be the IP address of the system you're SSH'd into. All right? When you do that, again, this is sent from the same IP address, but if you look at the bottom received header, it says 168, 143, 113, 101, which is the anonymizer connection. Now, this presents a bigger problem than open proxies and regular anonymizers, because the SSH tunnels aren't logged, and because who in the heck's generally going to think to go look at the SSH logs to try to figure out an email, where an email originated from? You're going to go to the email logs, right? You want to look at the email logs there, what's going on there. So this is currently probably one of the techniques that's a little bit more difficult to investigate. The nice thing is, though, there's nothing in the email logs, there's no useful information, you're trying to trace this back, what are you going to do? What's your first instinct if there's nothing in the email logs and an email came from a specific IP? Sorry? My first instinct is that somebody was logged into that system and sent that IP themselves. They telnetted directly to port 25 and they sent it from that system, right? Then there'd be nothing in the email entries on that server. So if that's your first instinct, where are you going to look? You're going to look at who is logged into the system at the time that email was sent and try to do your investigation from there. So even though this is, a tunnel that's a little bit more advanced at hiding yourself, if you're looking at the investigation in the correct light, even if you think they might be, somebody on the system, it's going to lead you at least to the right place to start looking into your investigation and who is logged on the system, because it's the SSH gen, they have to be logged on. Now, and again, you can, you look at the email headers, the logs on the SSH server, type of thing. Where we get really interesting is when people combine SSH tunnels and something like an open proxy. Instead of having the tunnel just go to having a tunnel from your client to the SSH server to the email server, they put in another hop. They have the tunnel go from your client to the SSH server to an open proxy, and then to the email server. So when you're looking back at that, I mean, I don't have a graphic for that one, but when you're looking back at that, let's trace that all the way back. So we've got client, SSH server, open proxy, delivered email. You're looking at delivered email. What's the IP address is it going to say it came from? The open proxy. So you're going to go back to your investigation there. You're going to look at the open proxy. When you look at the open proxy logs, where are they going to say that connection was proxied from? The SSH server. So then you're going to have to go look at SSH server and hopefully realize that if it's not in the email logs, that it's going to be, somebody logged into that system or somebody that's SSH in and tunneled into that system. That's the simplest case. You could do this. You can tunnel SSH tunnels inside SSH tunnels, type of thing. And you can go between multiple systems. You can get really complex really fast with this. All right. It all is, if you're good enough and have enough resources, that you can get this information from another country, something like that, you can trace it back from the log files. It just, every time, you add one of these areas of complexity, it gets harder and harder and harder and harder to trace it back because you've got to go to system to system to system to system to system to system type thing. So, yeah. A little louder, please. Yeah, it's a similar technique to that. There are a lot of anonymizing systems that do that, and they work on the basis of trying to, keep no information about where it came from or where it's going to, just forward it on to different type systems. And we'll talk a little bit about anonymizing systems and how they do, but it's a similar concept on that. As far as that goes, it's just you're creating almost your own anonymizing system through it. You're not using somebody else to set up. Absolutely. And ISPs only keep log files for certain lengths of time. So even if the logs are there and it's traceable back, if you don't get back in time, it's gone. So, so when you're looking for evidence, again, it's going to be, you're going to have to trace it back just from wherever it looks obvious, and it's going to be a lot of log file searching. Okay, so we talked about how you can go around, what people are doing with WebMail to try to obscure the originating IP, and that you can trace it back if you look in enough areas. It's just going to get harder and harder the more ways they try to do that. Local analysis, Yahoo and Hotmail. Standard browser analysis. I thought this was going to be more complicated than it was. It wasn't. There are tools out there, Encase, Access Data, I'll go in, look at the analysis. You've got some other specialized tools that have done nothing but looking at internet cache and information like that. So we'll go through this, but these are the places we talked about. The index.dat file, cache files, the typed URLs, auto-completion cookies, and history files. When you're looking at this and somebody says, I didn't even log into Hotmail, when that email was sent. I didn't even log into Hotmail that entire week type thing. And they're smart enough to go and they erase their internet cache, and so there's nothing there. And let's say you don't find anything in swap, anything like that, but you do see a cookie, a Hotmail cookie, that's sitting there, and its time stamp is from that week or that time that it was sent. Well, you got him. how else is that Hotmail cookie going to be placed there? Unless somebody put it manually type thing, but cookies are only placed there by browsers when you're actively logged into them. And so when you're looking at all this stuff, date and timestamp becomes extremely important. It's going to become even more important when you start looking at how to deconstruct some of the URLs to figure out the user's actions and what they're doing. But I tell you, if you've never gone and looked at like the index.dat file in your history, I would suggest you go do that, because some of those sites that you thought you'd cleaned up all that stuff because you've been looking at it, information's probably going to be there from what you've seen. But I'm going to get to it. Yeah, we're going to talk about some of those. But we're going to go through some examples here in a second. I'm going to jump back and forth. But here's some of the tools that you can use. Some of these are free, some of these are shareware, some of these are others. Again, the slides are on the CD, and I'm going to give my email at the end so that you can get these. But this is in addition to your other forensics tools like Encase and Access Data, tools that can go and do some of this. But these are specifically for looking at cache files, right here. And I'll show you a couple of these here in a second. I think, one of my favorites is Internet Cache Explorer. It does a really good job of bringing up everything, and you can sort it by URL, alphabetically, or you can do it by timestamps. And if you click on the URL, it'll bring up local cache copy of that page right there, and you can look at it. So I'll give everybody a quick second to finish copying those down. Bless you. All right. Again, I'll give you my email address at the end, so if you're not finished, don't worry about it. They're on the slides, and we'll get to them. But a couple of my favorites: Cache Auditor and Internet Cache Explorer for Internet Explorer, and then for Netscape, I like Web Cache Illuminator. To go through some of those. But here's an example of Internet Cache Explorer, and if you look, it basically gives you a list of all the cached URLs on one side, and it gives you, if you click on one of these URLs, if it's cached, it brings up whatever's cached. Gosh, look at that. That's a Yahoo Mail page right there. Just sitting on the system waiting for you to look at it. It also, give you some hex values and things at the bottom. But, all right. Before I go on, I'm going to jump to an example of Internet Cache Explorer real fast, and then we'll come back to the presentation. So let's see here. I've got so many things loaded on this, it may take a quick second to cache out. All right, Internet Cache Explorer. I've loaded it up, and it automatically goes to whatever the local cache is on your system. It goes to the destination on your computer, which is why oftentimes you need to create a clean install, copy all the useful information over, then you can run this on that system. But you don't want to run it on the original system, because then you're going to modify all kinds of stuff. But it basically gives you all these cached URLs. Look at all that. And here we get to some interesting ones. Oh, Yahoo. See this? mail.opi.yahoo.com. Come on. See the one that's highlighted? In a second over here, a little smiley face will come up. How many of you use Yahoo Mail? And you can, whenever somebody's online, what does it put by their name? Little smiley face, yellow, gray, whatever type thing, Notice how this has U equals, and then it has login names. Rowry, CruzDB, Lexus, all those names, those are the Yahoo logins, all right? Let's say somebody's deleted all these emails, and saying, I never got an email, I never heard of that guy. I never got an email involved anything about that guy. Well, if you see these links right there, the OPI, the mail.opa@yahoo.com, you know that they either received an email from this person was in the CC field, or in the to field. Okay? The only way those are put there for the different users. Oh, and it finally came up. See the little smiley face over here? Yay. The only way those are put there is if this person or this system was logged into Yahoo and read an email where that login name was either in the from field, the to field, or the CC field. So again, you can catch them sometimes, because people don't realize all these places that all this stuff is recorded. And now we'll go down. Only the people who are online, so that the little graphic face comes up. Does that make sense? So you don't know everybody in the CC field unless you can look at the email itself. And so this system's received a lot more emails than those systems. Those are just the people who are online at a time I received an email where they were in one of those fields. No, there are no entries. And the question was, are there any entries for the BCC fields? And no, because the BCC fields are never shown in the email headers. So now let's go down to one of these. Let's see what this will come up. This tool, there we go, basically lets you just go through, click on the URL that's cached, and voila. Look at that page. Lots of useful information there. We've got the login name of who was logged in at that time on that page. We got how much their mail is used. We've got this is their draft folder. We've got the other folders that they have. Dates and times, all this information right there. Now, this is a show folder. If you look up here, see that? Part of the URL, show folder? Well, that's why it's showing a folder. Guess what it is if it's going to be showing a message? Show message. And we'll get to one of those here next. But so, just from that, you get all this information about who's logged in at the time. You got, where it was sent, the subject, where it was sent from, all that information. So let's go back. Well, remember, this is based off what the user views. And it's also going to be based off how their browser is configured. The question is, what if they're using HTTPS or encryption? Do you still see this information? And the question is maybe. Or the answer is maybe. The question was what I said previously. The answer is maybe. Some browsers are configured not to cache any encrypted pages. Okay? If they don't cache it, it's not going to be there for you to see it. Other browsers and other people have configured their stuff to cache, SSL type pages, and if they're cached, it's decoded before it's ever shown, and it will be on here. So let's see if I can find a show message here. That's show folder, show, I'm sorry, not show, it's show letter. Oh, sorry, I got confused. Here we go. Let's bring that up quickly. I'm finally running faster. And here, this is, show letter, and here's everything. Obviously, this person, Akin2010@yahoo.com. And look, there's all that information. This is what they saw, and this was a Hushmail test to Yahoo. They opened up a Hushmail email, and look, it's right there. Just like they saw it. Cool stuff. So you can go through, do this for basically any web-based client. If it's been cached on the system, you'll see it. Yes? It does not follow through the cache. What it'll do is it'll ask you if you want to connect online and try to go to that URL. So it allows you to jump to an online URL, because when you run this program, it cuts off your internet connection and says run, don't connect to the internet. But no, it won't follow through the cache, unfortunately. That'd be a cool tool, so, So you can look at all the different types of letters that they saw and all the things they did, just by following down through this. And let's see if there are any Hotmail on here. There may not. I mean, Black Hat, card player, poker stuff. Sorry about that, guys. I'm not going to show you all these others because, that's not interesting. But I will talk about one thing. See this one right here? This is completely separate, but it's the coolest thing in the world. Cancel that. Sorry. All right, where'd that go? All right, sometimes it won't bring up a page. If part of the cache information has been deleted or it's been gone, but it's still in the index.dat file, it'll give you an error and it won't actually bring up the page sometimes. It'll only bring it up there. But I don't know if you've ever looked, but cached Google files, you can see what they've been searching for, which is always really cool. Because when people are actually going out on Google and they're searching for, bomb making, and no, I don't even know anything about the topic. And you go on their system and you see 42 searches for homemade bombs. Well, interesting information. Yeah. These are parsed from the index.dat files. But if you go here and click on history, these are parsed from the history files. And so we go down and click on them like that. Oops, cancel that. I didn't like that one. Hello. And you can bring up history from the history. So you can search through there too. And look through all that. And you go down through today, 1 week, older than 3 months, all kinds of stuff. And so it doesn't just do the cache, it'll also do the history also. You can walk down everything just like we just did. And if it's on the system, it's right there for you to look at. In an easy format. I'm not sure about that. I don't think, it only shows what they saw. So if they opened up the attachment, then that attachment is going to be on the system somewhere. Okay, if they open it up. If they haven't opened it up, then there's no way it's going to be on the system to get it. And so, you get the URL to that attachment, but unless you had their login information, you wouldn't be able to see it. And then the access sort over here, it also tells you, visited, the history. But it also shows you the cookies. And gives you information about the cookies down here. Type stuff. Cool stuff. And again, I haven't found anything super, super, super useful in the Yahoo or Hotmail cookies, except occasionally, like sometimes you'll get their login name, but also the timestamp is the most significant thing there. Because the only way they're going to get a cookie put on the machine is if they were logged into the online at the time that was happening. So, all right. Well, I will say that with a caveat. If you have the legal authority to do this, what he just said was that you can sometimes actually, if you can use their cookie files, if it includes all their authentication information, you can use their cookie files to then go in and authenticate them. You can't do it with Yahoo and Hotmail, but at least not that I've been able to do. I mean, so one of y'all can, great, show me how afterwards, but I'm not able to do it. But a lot of sites that can include all the authentication information, you can actually bounce into by copying the cookies over. Basically, you need a courts to give it to you somehow. You're either going to have to open a civil John Doe lawsuit and get a lawyer to get a judge to give you authority to do something like that. You have to work with law enforcement, and they're going to have to get a judge to give them a subpoena or search warrant to do that. So, not that, I'm sorry, I probably shouldn't have to say that caveat, not that anybody in here has ever done anything illegal or wrong, but I just wanted to, make sure that we point that out. or would even dream of doing it. Though I did, this system was configured for me by some of our technicians, at work, and I use Unix, and this is a Windows something system. And, it has online access, and I almost forgot to turn off the online access before I set it up here. But I figured I'd probably better do that because I just wondered how many scans it'd be getting, and it'd be real embarrassing at a security conference in the middle of your presentation to have like whitehouse.com or something come up on the screen, or or if you're so good, why is this? So I turned off all my network connections because I don't need on this system. So all right, so here's Internet Cache Explorer. That's probably one of my favorite tools. Close that one out. Cache Auditor is similar. The reason is so I've got access data open because we're going to show you access to this forensics toolkit here in a minute, and like searching other places, and it's taking up all my memory, so it's just slow. But this is kind of cool because it organizes the cache, into a folder structure. And so if we come down to, where's Yahoo? There we go, right here, Yahoo. All right. Now the lib underscore. The only way you're going to figure this out is just by going through it. All of Yahoo stuff starts with YM. And so if we go into this folder, look, there are all those URLs. And so this organizes them a little bit differently. And if we click on one of these, it should bring it up over here. And again, it just brings it up for you in the format just like the person saw it. Cool stuff. And so it's another tool that organizes a little bit differently, which can, depending on how you're trying to search, can be useful. So, all right, where are we on this thing? Let's go back to here. Now, some browsers are set up to every time you close it out to automatically delete your temporary internet files. Okay? If that happens, you're going to lose a lot of the information. You're going to pull this up and you're going to see nothing, or like just a couple or some old stuff, type things. You're getting frustrated. So, what we're going to talk about now is, even though they do that, there are other things that you can do and you can look at on this besides just the cache. You can still look at the index.dat, which will still probably have a lot of useful information, even if the cache files aren't there, and the cookies and things like that. But the URLs themselves contain a lot of useful information. So we're going to go through just two programs, just the Hotmail's and the Yahoo's URLs, but I want to talk about that. And you can actually follow, to a certain extent, what people are doing. Now, you can't get granular detail, as much as you'd like. Oftentimes you can't, it's difficult to tell, unless you're really lucky, who they'd send a message to or different things like that. But you can actually find out a lot about their activities. And some of the things to look for are URLs that have compose, show folder, show letter, preferences, options, or login. And what I've done is, again, I've created a quick summary document for Yahoo and Hotmail that I'll also email people. This isn't on your system because I created it. I felt it, after looking through the presentation, I felt it needed to be added, but it wasn't. I felt just an online example wouldn't be enough, so I can mail this to people if they email me. But for mail.yahoo.com, all right, you have a show folder. That's going to be the beginning of your URL. Then lots of other stuff will give you indication of the actions people have taken. The message ID, MSG ID, that's the current message ID of that Yahoo message. Now, I do not know why they do this, but those message IDs will, for the same exact message, will change between dates and login sessions. But only certain pieces of them will change. So notice the pieces in red on there. Those are the pieces that changed on that message ID. The rest of those were the same for that message, a month ago as they are today. I don't know why that is. I just know that is. So I wanted to point out that if the rest of them, from what I've been able to determine, message IDs are unique if you ignore the area in red on Yahoo. And then you'll see question mark RB equals. RB is the current mailbox that they're in. Inbox, draft, sent, whatever else. All right, you're investigating a burglary, and you see the current, folder, heist, type stuff. Why would you have a folder that, said heist, they may have all their emails stored and they deleted it later, but you can tell from the URL that there was a folder with that name on the system at whatever time that URL had. Interestingly enough, if there's a box, piece of the URL, that shows the previous folder they were in. And so you can tell, how they've moved through their folder sections. You won't see all these every time, but just if they're there, these are what they mean. Then if you see next equals 1, they clicked on the next button and went to the next email. So you can actually look at the order they looked through their emails by looking at the message IDs and looking if they clicked next, previous, last, whatever. And again, we have to let's see, the next equals whatever, last equals 1, first equals 1, previous equals 1. Right there. Those are some of the interesting things that you can find out. But it's really cool, just from going through their URLs, where it says show folder, by looking at the box and the RB, you can get a list of all the folders they ever looked in. And those aren't there now, and they said, I never had one called that. Well, if it's there, they looked at it. The other one is show letter. If you see a URL that starts with show letter, the message ID is going to be the current message ID. Box is the current folder. Notice how box changes between the two. So depending on the beginning URL, it's going to, give you different information. Next, previous, last equals first. If it equals 1, 2, not 2. If it equals 1, it equals true. It'll be in the URL. That means they clicked next and got to that by hitting next, previous, last, or first. And then, if you see head equals F, that means they had it turned on to show full headers. Okay? And so, that could be useful for some reason. I'm sure I'll think of one in a minute, but I thought it was interesting. But let's say somebody says, well, I know nothing about email, type of stuff. Headers, what are headers? But they've, configured the email to show themselves the full headers, that might be current information. So, compose, again, if you have the compose URL, you're not getting a whole lot of useful information, but the box will equal the previous folder. Okay? I wish it would give you information like, who they were sending it to and all stuff like that, but it's just, it's not there. And then other things, we talked about the mail.opi.yahoo.com, and if you see a URL like this, that means that they had some sort of communication with that person. Either they were, that person was in the from, to, or CC field of an email they sent. And now, real quickly, we'll go through Hotmail. Hotmail's basic URL is home. That's what you're going to see at the beginning. And then they don't use, in the URL, they don't use names for their folders. They use F numbers. All right? Here are the defaults. 1 is inbox, 2 is sent, 3 is draft, 4 is trash, 5 is junk. So when you're looking at this, you're going to have current inbox equals some F number. All right? If it's one of those, which 90% of the time it will be, you know which one it is. Unfortunately, custom folders are given custom numbers on the system. And you will not know the name. You'll just know that they were looking at a folder that they themselves created, and it was not one of the default folders. You'd actually, hopefully, you'd find in the cache, what folder they were looking at, type of thing. They're random, and I haven't been able to determine, just because there's so many darn numbers there, that possibilities, whether the numbers can be duplicate between people or whether they're unique across the whole scape of Hotmail accounts. I'm not sure which that is. Then if you see this URL, you know, Hotmail with a capital H, capital T, capital M, capital L, and you'll see current inbox. You know, that's the current box that they're looking at also at that time. It's another kind of HM home type thing when you're looking at folders. Now, if they're looking at individual messages, you're going to see the get message URL. The current inbox, again, is the current folder, and it's, again, the number. The message is the message ID, and they have a command option. And that command is like next, previous, last, and that's the command that they last clicked on. If they clicked on next, the URL is going to be equal next. Now you've got to remember, when these show up in the URL, the commands are like next equals 1 for Yahoo, that's what they just did. It told this URL to bring that information up. Interesting things you're going to see in the URLs when messages are deleted. You're going to see HM action, okay, in the URL equal to move. And what folder are they moving it to? The 2 box is going to be 0, you know, the 4, which is the trash. Now, again, if they move messages between other folders, you're going to see HM action move to other folders. Okay, so you can go back and see kind of what they've moved, but interesting one's deleted. Sometimes on these, you will both have an MSG and a last image MSG piece in the URL. Okay? The MSG is always the current message ID. Last is obviously the last message that they were on. I've been able to find no rhyme or reason of why the last MSG shows up. Last message shows up sometimes and doesn't other times. But if it is there, you know that they came immediately from that previous message to wherever they are at that point. Question? No. So, and then when they compose a message, it's going to tell you what folder they were in when they composed it with the current inbox. If they hit forward or reply all, you're going to get the compose URL, and it's going to have the message ID of the message that they are either forwarding or replying to. So at this point, if you know they have a message and they said, well, I never responded to that message. Well, if they have a compose with that ID, they did respond to that message. And the type right there, you'll have a type equals R for reply, F for forward, RA for reply all. So you can actually go in and, even if that's all you have is the URLs, you can figure out, you can actually get useful information out of this. Question? I do not believe it would be the same. The question was, is the message ID for an email the same even if an email is sent from one user to another user? And I can't give you a 100% answer, but email doesn't work that way. Email creates a unique message ID for forward or reverse or replied to messages. And so I'm going to give you a 99% guarantee that Hotmail is going to do the same. So, interesting, cool stuff you can find out from just the URLs. So if they deleted their cache, but there is a history, you can go back and find out all sorts of cool stuff. Let's see here. And we talked about Internet Cache Explorer already. This is just an example of Web Cache Illuminator. Netscape puts all their cache stuff in a single folder where I spread it out over lots of different places. And so this will, Web Cache Illuminator will only look at a single folder at a time. And it'll create an index of everything in that folder and give you the timestamp for that folder. And as you can see, oops. Ow, what am I doing? There we go. If they use Netscape, you got actually the names of it. MSN, Hotmail Compose, MSN, Hotmail Inbox. You've got actually the names of the files. You click on those, it's going to bring those up from cache from Netscape. It's a similar feature. But Web Cache Illuminator We'll create an index file, all the information in a folder, and show you all that information. Time order. Had a look. I think actually, wait a minute here. No, it's not time order, is it? Oh, the title. Thank you. Yeah. So you can switch between the two by clicking on this thing up here that I didn't even notice. And again, this is the type of thing. What this does is this brings it up. This brings the page up in the actual browser. In here, it brought it up in Explorer. I clicked on one of those links, and this is what was brought up. So we've already gone through a couple of demonstrations, so we won't. WebMail data and sniffers. Now this is where you can actually get sent mail information. If you've got a sniffer on that system, and you're looking at WebMail, you can actually, capture information. Yahoo by default and Hotmail by default do not use SSL encryption for their connections. All right? You have to actually click over when you look at Yahoo, it says sign in or secure sign in. If y'all remember that, if you just sign in, it goes to straight HTTP. I was going to do a demonstration, but my Etherreel is not set up to decode gzip encoding for HTML, and Yahoo and Hotmail both use the gzip HTML encoding, so you just get a sniffer that'll decode that, and you can actually see all the information sent back and forth, on the systems, and pull out and look exactly at what they sent and what they received. So, of course, if they're using encrypted HTTPS, they won't be able to see it. Yahoo used to use a while back, HTTP authentication. So you could sniff a packet, go in there, pull out the HTTP auth header, decode it, and you get their login information. Well, they've changed. Yahoo now actually includes password information in the URL itself. I'm sorry? Well, it is better, and it's not better. Nobody that I know of's, cracked it yet. It's probably, I'm sure it's just a matter of time. But whenever Yahoo goes in and you first log in, they have a rand function. It says rand equals some number, and I'm guessing that they use that to randomize their connections and they randomize the passwords, because the password encryption string when you log in changes on your sessions and time. And so if it was the same one every time, that'd be great. We could crack that fast. But it uses something different. So right now, I can't tell you a method for sniffing Yahoo's passwords and things like that. I wish I could, but not yet. Maybe next year I'll have that figured out, and then they'll change it again. But and this is the only, this is the way you get both incoming and outgoing email. Let's see here. Before we get to other options, I want to show you. I've run Access Data's Forensics Toolkit, on this system. And so if you don't want to use some of these other tools, because sometimes you'll find information in unallocated space and slack space. You'll find these emails. And I want to give you some hints as to what to look for when you're trying to find these type of emails. Those URL pieces that we talked about, show folder, show letter, all that other stuff, those are embedded in the HTML page itself all over the place. Every time you see a folder, when you're looking at the HTML page, it's a show folder URL, and stuff. So those are useful terms to search for. And so what I did is I went through my system and I searched for show letter right there. And let's see, even in a DLL file slack space, we were able to find this piece of a URL and of an email, and we'll go up to where all of a sudden we have this interesting thing, HTML starting here. We go down, checkbox, there's the ID, Yahoo. Now we can tell it's something to do with Julie Thacker. We're not sure if it was to or from Julie Thacker. We go down, and here's the show letter. And there's a folder and inbox, and there's everything. the ordering, the sort date, I didn't talk about those things. View, head equals B. What do you think that stands for? Basic. And so it's not F, so that when we're looking at this, and then it says what box? Thin box. And obviously it looks like it was about tennis news. How exciting. I don't even play tennis. Who's using this system? Date, all that. And so we can go down through. And in File Slack, you'll actually find pieces. File Slack in allocated space, you'll find pieces of these HTML emails. You'll find pieces of other emails also. Okay, so that's not anything new. But what I'm here to tell you is, oftentimes, access data in Encase, they look for email headers to identify something as an email. Okay, and show it to you. These email headers are embedded in HTML code, and they're not going to be recognized as email by access data in Encase. You're going to actually have to go and search yourself for these pieces and fragments. And show folder and show letter are great for Yahoo. Hotmail is good for Hotmail. But I just wanted to show you that example. Now, we also, at show folder, I looked, we found all these things. Here's another file Slack and another DLL. And again, we have, let's see, what was this one about? Welcome T. Oh, this was one of my dummy accounts I set up. But, you got all this information. Home with ease, what home game stuff, ads. But you can find pieces of all this stuff. Sometimes you'll find pieces that they're sent emails to. This is one of the only places sometimes you'll find pieces of sent email, especially if it's in a page file or someplace like that, or it happened to be in memory when a file was written out with some Slack space. Now, show folder and show letter were really useful. 6895 hits, and this system's been used a lot. Then I did compose. Big mistake. Thing ran for an hour. 177,825 hits on compose. Compose is a pretty common word. I don't recommend you sort on compose. The show letter and show folder are pretty distinct. And so just when you're searching, don't make the mistake I made. Use useful ones. And then you can do the same for the Hotmail URLs. This current inbox, the other things, whatever they were, I forget, brain overload type things. And so, but what I wanted to point out is that when you're using tools, forensics tools, to look at an unallocated Slack space, they're not going to be automatically identified as emails by the programs since the email headers aren't there. Yeah? Yes, you can copy and paste it. But the question was, can you cut out that HTML code from the system, and then save it to a file and then view it? You absolutely can, but it's not going to give you much useful information. Because the only graphics you'll see will be the generic graphics from Yahoo, okay? And and the rest of the information you'll probably just find out from the HTML code. And it usually won't have the HTML headers and footers. And so it'll just be like a slice of it. It's worth a try, but it's probably not going to give you much more than you would get by looking at it yourself. All right. Real quick, and the last slide, some of the other options: Hushmail, Ziplip, and anonymous mailers. Oh my gosh, I just screwed up again. There we go. All right. Hushmail works by installing a Java application into your browser. It uses HTTPS, for the entire session. By paying a fee, you can actually set it up so that you can send, encrypted email between people. You can send an email so they can bring it up in their browser, type of thing. But I have not found, playing with Hushmail, they've done a pretty good job. I've not found a whole lot of useful information on the system with Hushmail. You can find bits and pieces. You can usually find the login that they used. That's been about it. I've not been able to find any information about the emails, what content in the emails or who they sent to. I've only been able to find the login information to Hushmail. Ziplip, actually, I put that on there because I was told that was a service, but it's actually not a web-based service. But so there are some other web-based services that try to do this type of thing. Some do it better than others. The best thing to do is going to be to actually just try to get on the system itself, or maybe set up a test system, use that client for a while, and then go into the Forensic Connect browser and see what's going on. Then anonymizers was what you talked about earlier, and anonymizers make investigation very difficult when they go through. Let's see, I think, who is it? Berkeley runs a web-based anonymizer, okay? When you're looking at anonymizers, if you're using a web-based anonymizer, oftentimes you can get bits and pieces. First, you'll know that they went to the anonymizer unless they deleted it, and whatever they saw on the screen that came down from the server is going to be cached, all right? If they're using one with SSL encryption and they're set up not to cache SSL, you won't see that, but you will see it in the history type thing, and you'll see that information. So using web-based anonymizers is probably not a really good idea. Now, you're not going to be able to trace the email back, but you will find some information on the local PC. So if somehow or another you can identify the local PC, like somebody was stupid enough to use an anonymizer and put their real name in there, or something like that, but if you get to the PC, you will find some of the information. If you're actually telnetting directly, if you create a text file with the anonymizer information, all the header information for how you want it forwarded, and you actually put that in, type it in yourself, the only chance you're going to find that stuff is going to be on the local system in file and slack space. Or if they're stupid enough not to delete or purge the file they created, they told it how to route through the different systems. So, as far as anonymizers go, you may have some luck if they're using web-based, but if they're not using web-based, you're going to have a lot more difficulty with that. So, question? Yeah, actually, some of them can. Web Cache Illuminator, yeah. Ones like Internet Cache Explorer won't, because they just do the Internet Explorer stuff. The Web Cache Illuminator, the one we looked at Netscape with, will bring up an index of all the graphics in a directory. You don't even have to use it for cache. You could use it for other graphics and then click on it too. And so that's adaptable to any browser. You just have to know where to look. Whereas Internet Cache Explorer does it for you. But if you're just using a tool, yeah. FatDB is for Netscape. And in all honesty, I've worked less Netscape cases than I have IE cases, and so I usually go through and let Access Data or Encase parse that. Access Data or Encase parse that file for me. The question was about the FatDB file, and actually, so many people use IE, Internet Explorer, that's actually most of what I've worked on, but you can actually use those other tools. And there probably are some out there. I just, at this time, haven't taken the time to go locate them. All right. Well, I'll take any questions, but here's my email address. Right here at the bottom. And my mailing address if you just want to send me, money or anything. But if you would like the 2 Word documents that talk about, the different URLs and what they mean for Hotmail and Yahoo, I'll be glad to get that to you. If you want a copy of the presentation emailed to you, I'd be glad to do that also. And so, if we have any questions, I'll go ahead and take those. If not,